Lonely mountain man saw her thrown out of the boarding house. He offered his spare and his heart high in the quiet mountains, far above the noise of the valley town, lived a man who had almost forgotten what company felt like. He was known only as the mountain man to most people below. Few knew his real name and fewer still knew his story. He had built his small wooden cabin with his own hands years ago, choosing the high ground not for pride but for peace. The mountains did not ask questions. They did not judge. They simply stood, steady and patient, much like him. His days followed a simple rhythm. He woke before sunrise, fed the animals he kept, checked the weather by looking at the sky instead of a screen, and worked until the light faded. Some days he repaired fences. Other days he cut firewood or hunted. In the evenings, he cooked simple meals and sat near the window, watching shadows stretch across the trees. Silence filled his cabin, but it was a silence he had chosen after life had taken too much from him. The town below was not far in distance, but it felt like another world. He only went there when he had to, usually once every few weeks for supplies. The people there remembered him as polite but distant. He spoke little, paid in cash, and never stayed long enough for conversation. Rumors followed him as they always do with quiet people. Some said he was broken. Others said he simply hated company. The truth was softer and heavier than either. On a cold afternoon with clouds gathering low over the peaks, he drove his old truck down the narrow road into town. Snow had not yet fallen, but winter was close. He needed flour, fuel, and medicine for his joints, which ached more each year. He parked near the main street, finished his shopping quickly, and stepped outside with a small box in his arms. That was when raised voices caught his attention. Across the street, outside one of the older boarding houses, a woman stood on the steps, her belongings scattered at her feet. A worn suitcase lay open, clothes spilling onto the ground. A thin coat hung loosely on her shoulders, not enough for the cold air biting through town. The door behind her slammed shut, and a sharp voice echoed one final sentence before fading into silence. She did not cry. She did not shout back. She simply stood there, frozen, staring at the closed door as if it might reopen if she waited long enough. People passed by. Some glanced, others looked away. No one stopped. The mountain man paused. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself this was how towns worked, and getting involved only caused trouble, yet his feet did not move. Something about the way she stood reminded him of a moment from his own past, a moment when he had been left alone with nowhere to go. The woman slowly bent down and began stuffing her clothes back into the suitcase with shaking hands. Her movements were rushed but tired, like someone who had already used all her strength earlier and had none left to spare. Her face was pale, eyes tired, lips pressed together to keep control. A gust of wind lifted loose papers and scarves from the ground. One slipped toward the street, and before she could chase it, a boot stepped on it. The mountain man looked down, picked it up, and held it out to her. She looked up, startled. Their eyes met for the first time. Hers were wide, guarded, and filled with something deeper than fear. They were the eyes of someone who had learned not to expect help. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the paper back. He nodded once, unsure what to say. He should have walked away then. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But instead he glanced at the thin coat, the heavy clouds above, and the empty street stretching ahead of her. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, his voice low and careful. She hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. "Not right now," she admitted. Silence stretched between them. He felt the old warning rise in his chest, the one that told him to stay alone, to keep life simple. Yet another feeling pushed back, quiet but firm. It was the same feeling that had once led him up the mountain to build a life from nothing. "I've got a spare room," he said finally. "Up in the mountains, it's nothing fancy, just warm." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion alone, but in disbelief. "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly, "just offering." She looked past him at the town, at the closed doors and passing strangers. The choice in front of her was not much of a choice at all. After a long moment, she nodded. Okay. The drive up the mountain was quiet. The road twisted through trees and rock, climbing higher with every mile. She held her suitcase close, staring out the window while he focused on the road. Neither asked questions. Words felt too heavy for a first meeting like this. As the town disappeared below, she finally spoke. You live all the way up here alone. Yes. Doesn't it get lonely? He thought about it. Sometimes, he said honestly. The cabin came into view just as the first snowflakes began to fall. It stood strong against the wind, light glowing softly from the window. He parked and helped carry her suitcase inside. The warmth hit her immediately. The place was simple but clean. A wooden table, a small stove, shelves lined with tools and books. It felt lived in, not abandoned. The spare room's there, he said, pointing down the hall. You can rest. I'll make some soup. She nodded again, clearly unsure what to say. Before disappearing into the room, she turned back. I'm Charlotte, she said. He paused, then replied, You can call me Eli. As the door closed behind her, Eli stood alone in his cabin, listening to the wind outside and the quiet inside. For the first time in years, the silence felt different. Not empty, waiting. And without realizing it yet, both of their lives had just shifted in a way neither could undo. Morning arrived slowly in the mountains. The light did not rush in the way it did in town. It crept gently through the trees and touched the cabin windows like a careful guest. Eli was already awake. Years of living alone had trained his body to rise early, long before the sun cleared the peaks. He moved quietly through the cabin, not wanting to wake Charlotte. He set water to heat on the stove and stepped outside to check the weather. The air was sharp but clean. Snow from the night before rested lightly on the ground, enough to whiten the world without hiding it. The mountain felt calm, steady, unchanged by the small shifts in human lives beneath it. When he returned inside, he paused near the hallway. The door to the spare room was closed. For a moment, he wondered if he had done the right thing. Letting a stranger into his home went against every rule he had lived by for years. Still, the memory of her standing alone in the cold returned to him, and the doubt eased. Charlotte woke slowly, unsure at first where she was. The bed was warm, the room quiet. She sat up and listened. No shouting, no footsteps pacing outside the door, just the low crackle of a stove and the distant sound of wind brushing the cabin walls. She stood, smoothed her clothes, and opened the door. Eli looked up from the stove. Morning, he said simply. Morning, she replied, her voice soft but steady. He handed her a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. She hesitated, then accepted it. They sat at opposite sides of the table, the space between them respectful, almost careful. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that allowed breathing. After breakfast, Eli stood and grabbed his jacket. I've got some work to do outside, he said. You're welcome to rest or help, whatever you prefer. I can help, Charlotte said quickly, surprising even herself. He nodded, handed her a pair of gloves, and showed her how to stack firewood properly so it would stay dry. They worked side by side, saying little. She noticed how patient he was, how he never rushed, how he explained things only when needed. By midday, her hands ached, but she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Useful, grounded. They sat on the steps for lunch. Charlotte watched the mountain stretch endlessly, layered in shades of gray and white. It's beautiful, she said. It grows on you, Eli replied. She smiled faintly. I think it already has. The words surprised him. He glanced at her, then looked away, unsure how to respond. That afternoon, Charlotte explored the cabin while Eli worked nearby. She noticed small details that spoke of a long, quiet life. A pair of worn boots by the door, a carved wooden bird on the shelf, old photos tucked into a book, faces faded but carefully kept. That evening, as the sky darkened, she finally spoke the words she had been holding back. I won't stay long, she said. Just until I figure things out. Eli nodded. Take the time you need. She studied him. You don't even know why I was thrown out. I figured you'd tell me when you're ready. Her eyes softened at that. Days passed. The mountains settled into routine, and so did they. Charlotte helped with cooking and cleaning. Eli showed her how to tend the small garden and read the signs of coming weather. Laughter began to slip into their conversations, unexpected but welcome. At night, Charlotte lay awake thinking. The safety of the cabin felt unreal, like it could disappear if she trusted it too much. She had trusted before. That trust had cost her everything. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside, the past finally pressed too hard to ignore. I didn't leave the boarding house because I couldn't pay, she said suddenly, staring into the fire. Eli did not speak, but he listened. They accused me of something I didn't do, she continued. Something easy to believe, easier than the truth. She waited for judgment. It did not come. I ran because staying meant fighting alone, she said quietly. Eli nodded slowly. Running doesn't make you weak. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time she felt the tight knot in her chest loosen. That night the wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, two lonely lives rested under the same roof, both aware that something fragile and important was forming between them. Neither knew how long it would last. Neither knew how much it would change them. But for now it was enough to stay. The mountain changed as the weeks passed. Snow came and went, sometimes light and quiet, sometimes heavy enough to close the road for days. Inside the cabin, time moved differently. Days blended together, not in a dull way, but in a steady, calming rhythm. For Eli, the routine felt familiar. For Charlotte, it felt like learning how to breathe again. Every morning, they worked side by side. Eli showed her how to check traps, repair small things, and care for the animals. Charlotte learned quickly. She paid attention, asked thoughtful questions, and remembered details. Eli noticed this and admired it silently. He was not a man who spoke his feelings easily, but respect came naturally to him, and it grew stronger each day. Charlotte took pride in helping. She cleaned, cooked, and slowly added her own touches to the cabin. A cloth over the table, a small plant by the window. These were simple things, but they changed the space. The cabin no longer felt like a place meant for one person waiting out his days. It felt alive. Eli noticed the changes but did not stop them. In fact, he welcomed them more than he expected. At night, when he sat by the fire, the cabin felt warmer, not just from the flames but from the quiet presence of another human life nearby. They talked more now, not in long speeches but in small moments, over meals, while fixing a fence, while watching the sky change colors at sunset. Charlotte spoke about growing up in crowded places, always surrounded by people but never truly seen. Eli spoke about choosing the mountains after loss had made noise unbearable. One evening Charlotte asked, "Do you ever regret leaving everything behind?" Eli thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes I miss parts of it," he said, "but I don't miss who I was there." She nodded, understanding more than she said. As trust grew, so did something else. It was not sudden or loud. It came quietly, like snow settling on branches. A look held a second longer than necessary. A smile that stayed after words ended. A shared laugh that felt deeper than the joke itself. Charlotte noticed how Eli always made sure the path was clear for her in icy weather. How he quietly placed extra blankets near her room when nights grew colder. Eli noticed how Charlotte waited for him at dinner instead of eating alone. How she remembered his favorite meals without asking. Neither named what was happening. One afternoon, while repairing the roof, Eli slipped. It was not serious, but enough to send his heart racing. Charlotte ran to him, fear flashing across her face. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'm fine," he said, steadying himself. But the way she looked at him stayed with him long after the moment passed. It made him realize how much he had come to matter to someone else again. That realization scared him more than the fall. That night, Eli barely slept. Old fears returned. Letting someone close meant risking loss. He had built this life to avoid that pain. And yet, the thought of Charlotte leaving felt heavier than the thought of being alone again. Charlotte lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. She felt safe here, but safety had fooled her before. She wondered if she was leaning too much on someone who owed her nothing. She did not want to become a burden or a mistake. The next day, tension lingered quietly between them. Not anger, but uncertainty. They moved carefully, both afraid of saying the wrong thing. It was Charlotte who finally broke the silence. "I don't want to pretend I don't feel it," she said, standing by the window. "But I also don't want to ruin what this is." Eli swallowed. "Neither do I." They stood in silence, not touching, not looking away. The space between them felt charged, full of words unsaid. "I trust you," Charlotte said softly. "That scares me." Eli nodded. "It scares me too." They agreed to take things slowly, to let the bond form without pressure or promises. It was not a dramatic moment. No grand declarations. Just honesty, fragile and real. Winter deepened. The world outside grew quiet, wrapped in white. Inside the cabin, warmth grew in ways Eli had not expected. Charlotte began to laugh more freely. Eli found himself smiling without effort. Yet beneath the calm, both knew the past was not finished with them. The mountain might protect them from storms, but it could not keep secrets buried forever. And as the days grew shorter, a question hovered unspoken between them, waiting for the moment it would have to be answered. Winter tightened its grip on the mountain. Snow now lay deep around the cabin, and the road to town had been closed for weeks. The world felt smaller, quieter, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, life continued, but something had shifted. The warmth between Eli and Charlotte was still there, yet it felt careful, like both were afraid to step the wrong way. Eli noticed it first. Charlotte still helped, still smiled, but she was quieter. Sometimes she stared out the window for long moments, lost in thought. When he asked if she was all right, she always said yes, but her voice did not fully match the words. Charlotte noticed changes too. Eli had grown more distant, not cold, but guarded. He worked longer hours outside, even in the freezing air. At night, he sat by the fire with a thoughtful look, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. Both were trying to protect the same fragile thing, and neither knew how. One morning, the silence broke in a way neither expected. Eli was chopping wood when he saw a figure moving on the lower path. His first thought was that his eyes were playing tricks on him. No one came up the mountain in this weather, but as the figure drew closer, he felt a tightness in his chest. It was a man from town. Eli wiped his hands and walked down to meet him, leaving Charlotte inside. The man looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, his coat dusted with snow. "I didn't expect to find you here," the man said. "Road was barely passable." "What do you want?" Eli asked calmly. The man hesitated. "It's about the woman staying with you." The words hit harder than Eli expected. "What about her?" he asked, his voice firm. The man sighed. "People are talking. Things from her past came up again. Some say she ran because she had something to hide." Eli felt anger rise, but he kept his face still. "That's town talk." "Maybe," the man said, "but trouble has a way of climbing hills." Eli said nothing more. He turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving the man behind without another word. Charlotte knew something was wrong the moment Eli stepped inside. His shoulders were tense, his eyes dark with thought. "Who was that?" she asked. "Someone from town," Eli replied. She went still. "About me?" he nodded. The room felt suddenly smaller. "What did they say?" Charlotte asked quietly. Eli hesitated, then chose honesty. "They're digging into your past again." Charlotte closed her eyes. For a moment she looked very tired. "I knew this would happen," she said. "I didn't want it to reach you." Eli took a step closer. "I can handle town talk." She shook her head. "It's not just talk. Wherever I go, it follows." She finally told him the full story, not in dramatic words but plainly. She had been blamed for something that was not hers to carry. The truth had been buried under louder voices, and once a story like that started, it never fully stopped. Eli listened without interruption. When she finished, the fire crackled loudly in the silence. "That's it?" he asked gently. She nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "If you want me to leave, I understand." The words cut deeper than she intended. Eli felt a familiar fear rise, not fear of her past, but fear of the future, of losing what had quietly become his home again. "I don't want you to leave," he said honestly. Charlotte looked up, surprised. "But," he continued, "I need to be sure we're not just hiding from the world." She swallowed. "I don't want to hide, I just don't know how to fight anymore." That night, sleep did not come easily. The storm outside grew stronger, wind pressing against the cabin as if testing its strength. Inside, both lay awake, lost in their own thoughts. Eli wondered if he was strong enough to stand beside someone again. Charlotte wondered if she was asking too much simply by staying. The next day, Eli made a decision. "I'm going to town," he said over breakfast. Charlotte's face paled. "The road, I'll manage." She looked at him, worry clear in her eyes. "Why?" "Because running won't end this," he said, "and because you shouldn't have to face it alone." When he returned hours later, exhausted and cold, Charlotte met him at the door. "What happened?" she asked. Eli set his coat down. "I spoke to the right people, not to argue, just to make things clear." "And?" she asked softly. "And I told them the truth matters more than rumors." Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness but of relief. Still, the tension did not disappear overnight. Some fears take time to loosen their grip. Charlotte struggled with guilt, worried she had pulled Eli into something unfair. Eli struggled with doubt, wondering if love was worth reopening old wounds. One evening, as they sat together watching the fire, Charlotte spoke. "If staying means hurting you, I can go." Eli turned to her. "If leaving means hurting you, I won't let you." They looked at each other, the weight of the choice clear between them. Outside, the storm passed. The sky cleared, stars shining sharply above the mountain. For the first time since the past resurfaced, both felt a quiet sense of strength returning. Not because the world had changed, but because they had faced it together. Yet one final choice still waited ahead. And it would decide not just where they lived, but who they became. Spring came slowly to the mountain, as if the land itself wanted to be certain winter was truly finished before letting go. Snow melted in thin streams that ran past the cabin, carrying away the weight of cold months. Trees began to show small signs of green again. Birds returned, their sounds filling the quiet spaces that had once belonged only to wind. Inside the cabin, change was happening too. The tension that had lived between Eli and Charlotte after the visit from town did not disappear all at once. It faded little by little, replaced by something stronger, understanding. They spoke more openly now, not just about the present, but about fears, doubts, and hopes they had never shared with anyone else. One morning, Charlotte stepped outside and breathed deeply. The air felt different, lighter. She watched Eli repairing a fence, moving with calm confidence. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not built on running away. She walked over and handed him a tool he had forgotten. Their hands brushed, and this time neither pulled away. "I've been thinking," she said. Eli looked at her, attentive. "About what?" "About staying," she replied, "not just because it's safe, but because it feels right." He did not answer right away. He set the tool down and leaned against the fence, considering her words carefully. "I've been thinking too," he said, "about what it means to share a life, not just a roof." They stood quietly, the mountain stretching around them, solid and patient. "I don't want to live afraid anymore," Charlotte said, "and I don't want to hide. But I also don't want to leave just because the past makes noise." Eli nodded. "The past can talk. It doesn't get to decide." That evening they sat by the fire, closer than they ever had before. There was no rush, no pressure, just a shared warmth and a sense of choice. Days turned into weeks. The road reopened and the town became reachable again. Charlotte felt nervous the first time Eli asked if she wanted to go with him. "You don't have to," he said gently. "I want to," she replied. The town looked smaller than she remembered, less powerful. People noticed her, whispered at first, then grew quieter when they saw she did not shrink or hurry away. Eli walked beside her, steady and calm. He did not speak for her. He did not need to. His presence said enough. Some people avoided her. Others nodded politely. A few surprised her with quiet kindness. It was not perfect, but it was real. Back on the mountain, Charlotte began to build something of her own. She planted a small garden. She repaired old furniture instead of replacing it. She added warmth not by changing the cabin, but by filling it with life. Eli watched this with quiet pride. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten how much stronger a shared life could be. He no longer measured days by survival alone, but by moments. Shared meals. Shared work. Shared silence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Eli spoke words he had practiced many times in his head. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said, "but I know I don't want to face it alone anymore." Charlotte felt tears rise, not from fear, but from something close to peace. "I'm not asking for promises," she said, "just honesty." "You'll always have that," he replied. They did not mark the moment with grand gestures, no sudden changes. Just a simple understanding that this was home now, not because of the cabin, not because of the mountain, but because they had chosen each other freely. Summer arrived bright and full. The mountain bloomed. Laughter came more easily. The cabin felt open, welcoming. People from town began to visit occasionally, curious but respectful. Eli was no longer just the quiet man on the mountain. Charlotte was no longer the woman who ran. They were simply two people who had found something rare through kindness and courage. One night, as stars filled the sky, Charlotte stood outside and looked up. "I used to think being alone was safer," she said softly. "And now?" Eli asked. "And now I think being brave is better," he smiled. The mountain remained as it always had, strong, silent, and steady. But the cabin no longer held loneliness within its walls. It held warmth, trust, and a future built not on fear but on choice. What began as a spare room had become a shared life, and for both of them that was more than enough.